Please join me in welcoming Bo Sing Tang, professor at Hong Kong University, presenting urban planning for a livable, high-density environment in Hong Kong. Professor Tang is currently a professor at the Department of Urban Planning and Design at the University of Hong Kong. And we welcome Professor Tang. When you're ready, just let Chelsea know.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen in Hawaii. Good afternoon. Thank you very much. Great honors to join this webinar to share with you some experiences about urban planning for livable high density in Hong Kong. So in the next half hour, I'm going to share with you some major consideration in urban planning of our high density city. Exactly to trying to tell you how urban planning can contribute to a livable environment to make it work for us. And I'm going to highlight some benefits, but also some challenges and problems yet to be addressed. And I wish to emphasize that ours is not necessarily the only way to plan, develop, and manage a livable city. So first of all, where is Hong Kong? Hong Kong is in Asia, located in the southern part of China, in a region we used to call the River Delta, but today we call it the Greater Bay Area. Now, Hong Kong is a compact world city and international financial and business center with a population of over 7.5 million on a very small territory of only slightly more than 1,000 square kilometers. So our average density is very, very high. If my figures about Hawaii or Honolulu are correct, our overall density is probably more than 3 times that of Honolulu. But if you count only our urban areas, our density or population density is even higher. I will show you in a minute. With such a high population density, how do we planners in Hong Kong develop and plan and manage Hong Kong to make it work? Now here I would like to draw your attention to a recent report published by our planning department of the government. If you are indeed very interested in this report, in fact, you can Google it and download the report from the public domain. It's available. I think this report presents and summarizes pretty well the key ideas and thinking about future urban planning and design of our city to make it a livable, high-density city. So how is livability related to population density? Here, I have extracted this diagram from the report. It tries to compare the quality of living and population density and see their relationship. And the Hong Kong planners are trying to benchmark our city with other international cities, as you can see here. And here we are using Mercer quality of living city ranking as the benchmark. On the horizontal axis, we have the city ranking, and on the vertical axis, we have urban population density. Where is Hong Kong? Hong Kong was ranked around 70 city ranking with a very high population density. Therefore, you see Hong Kong is on the top right-hand quadrant in this diagram. Honestly, we cannot do much to reduce our urban population density. The goal of Hong Kong planners, as you can see from this diagram here, is to try to move up the ladder of city ranking. In other words, to improve our livability and to move further to the right. Now, Honolulu was not initially in the diagram. I tried to add it here using Mercer 2019 ranking. And Honolulu, as you can see, is somewhere here. Now, I can say that Honolulu is doing very well in terms of ranking. It was ranked 37, slightly higher than Paris, and of course, much better than Hong Kong. So congratulations to all of you. And of course, you have much, much lower population density. Another message from this diagram, as you can see, is indeed it is possible to have higher or slightly higher population density and indeed still maintaining or in fact having very, very good or even better livability ranking. Singapore, as you can see, and Vienna are example here. So what is meant by a livable city? And what is livability? There are, of course, many, many ways to define it. Now, the Hong Kong planners have adopted this definition from the United Nations Habitat Agenda. You can see livability relates very much to the sense of personal and collective well-being. But you can also see livability is not just about housing alone. It's also related to many other aspects in city, such as education, work and play, mobility and convenience, health and welfare, security and safety, environment, and so on. So you can see livability is indeed about good planning and management of the entire city in spatial, in social, and also about environmental qualities. In Hong Kong, our goal is to achieve good qualities of our urban environment to make it work for our community. For those who know about Hong Kong, you know that we have concentrated our development on around 24% of our existing land area, mostly around the harbor, what we call Victoria Harbor, and on both sides of the coast and along major transport corridors. So what happens to the rest of the land? Many of the other areas, in fact, are hilly areas that are rather difficult to develop, or they are in remote location that lacks infrastructure support. This diagram shows you that we have kept more than 40% of the territories as our country parks, similar to the concept of national parks, mainly for recreation and conservation. And we built walking trails in scenic areas in the country parks. Compact development, as you can see in Hong Kong, concentrating on only around 24% of the land, give us a lot of benefits and advantages. When we look at Hong Kong from the sky, you can see we have a lot of greenery areas. Our country parks and all these greenery areas are within easy reach to us. Indeed, our country parks are very famous to international tourists and also hikers, because these parks are very close to the urban districts and they have stunning sceneries. This is a photo that I took on an afternoon trip on a sunny day to a hillside looking south to the Victoria Harbor here. You can see the coastline on Hong Kong Island at a distance. And this trip, the return trip as a whole, took me around 3 hours to complete. Another advantage of having high density and compact development is that on the street level, you are able to find a lot of vibrancy and activities, as previous speaker has also talked about. And the public spaces are within easy reach to our homes. And this creates a lot of convenience and attraction to families, to teenagers, and to young people, and so on. Concentration of our urban population and activities in the compact city can also enhance the efficiencies of public investment in urban infrastructures, such as metro, roads, footbridges, public transport services, and so on. These public infrastructures and facilities are indeed very costly to build and operate, and you need people, users, riders, passengers to sustain the operation. Indeed, when more urban population is using the public transports and the mass transit, it can generate lower carbon footprint, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, encourages walkabilities, indeed, which is healthier to the urban dwellers, and also reduce the needs to build more roads. Compact city development can also support conservation and also preservation of our valuable natural and built assets. In this example, we can transfer the plot ratio of this heritage building to a nearby site by expanding vertically upward instead of horizontally. We do not need to demolish and remove these assets. Furthermore, with a higher population density and urban vibrancy, it also makes it easier to find suitable adaptive reuses of these heritage buildings to give them new lives and also make efficient use of these assets. And compact city development can also avoid unnecessary sprawl to encroach on our beautiful natural landscape. So how does our urban planning achieve these benefits? Here, we need to have vision and planning strategies. In Hong Kong, we have a strategic plan called Hong Kong 2030 Plus to tell us in broad terms what are the broad development directions. We also need to prepare statutory plans. These are plans with legal power to tell everyone where to build what. We also need to have regulatory institution. For example, in Hong Kong, we have an authority called the Town Planning Board to prepare the plans and give approval to development proposal. Last but not least, we also need to have investment, especially from the public sector, like the government, in, for example, our new towns, in land reclamation, in roads, in public housing, in school, in hospital, and so on. So, what are the controls that urban plans in Hong Kong exercise to achieve these purposes? In general, there are three major aspects of control or major concern. First, land uses. For example, whether a particular piece of land or properties should be used for commercial, residential, industrial, mixed uses, and so on. Second, we also exercise control on development density. For example, how much floor space you can build on a piece of land, floor area ratio or plot ratio used to call, number of car parks, and so on. Next, we are also interested to exercise control on build form. For example, how many stories you can build on a piece of land, on the master plan, and so on. These are all important because both the government, public sector cannot build everything. We also need to steer the private sector and other parties to implement the development plan. Now, the previous speaker has already explained about this. We try to exercise control on building density in order to influence the distribution of population density. And it's important to realize that high building density does not necessarily mean high-rise development. You can have the same building density, but with different form, high-rise to low-rise. And the building footprint of low-rise development here in Paris, for example, on the left-hand side, in fact, is found to generate more floor spaces than the tall building on the same area of land in Hong Kong on the right-hand side. The difference, as you can see, is the amount of ground level open space that we can generate. Our approach, therefore, is to try to build vertical city by lumping buildings, floor spaces, and activities on smaller amount of land. High density developments work extremely well, especially in metro station in Hong Kong. In this example, Kowloon Station is one of the showcases. On a piece of land or around 13.5 hectares, we built 19 towers, including our tallest building, the International Commercial Center here. We refer this to the vertical wall streets because it provides, according to the developer, about the same amount of office spaces along Wall Street, but here we pile it up vertically. The whole station is a mixed-use development with hotel, service apartments, residential housing, landscape gardens put on top of a shopping mall with metro station, check-in counter for airports, and also public transport interchanges, all in one place. And in so doing, we are able to produce a lot of green spaces on the podium ground level that blend well with the surrounding buildings for the residents, but also for the public. Even with this approach, our city center is still very dense and congested. Some urban districts have tremendously high population density. In Kowloon, the area circled by yellow, the population density is 6 to 7 times more than the overall average. In our district, Kwun Tong here, circled by orange, the density is the highest at 61,600 person per square kilometer. To tackle urban congestion and to provide additional housing, since the 1960s and 70s, the Hong Kong government has begun building new towns outside the main urban districts. So far, 9 of them have been built to help decentralize the population and provide much better living environment. And we are continuing to build more new towns. As you can see from this diagram, these new towns are connected with the main urban core by highways and railway, and they are built with much lower density, as you can see from this diagram. One example is the Tai Po New Town. It looks to me, if my figures are correct, the area, the population level and density look very similar to the core urban districts of Honolulu. All our new towns have comprehensive urban planning and design in order to create a pleasant living environment. Balanced communities is one of our major objectives. We provide a mix of social housing, we call it public housing, and also private housing here in the new town, together with a lot of open spaces, green spaces, and community uses. And in the new town like Tai Po, we also blend the new development with the villages and also provide an industrial park to provide employment in the area. This is the green area showing the industrial park. So with good planning and design in new towns, urban users can blend well with the countryside. High-rise development can avoid urban sprawl and allows conservation of our landscape area, our cultural land, our heritage sites, and also many traditional uses. Our complexity development and high-density development make it very effective to have rail transit-oriented type of urban form. We have very high proportions of our urban land uses built around or within working distance. In Hong Kong, we talk about 500 meters away from a metro station. Indeed, over 90% of our daily commuting relies on public transport, including metro, buses, public buses, but also ferries. In urban planning, good connectivities and accessibilities play a very important role to enhance livability. In another new town called Tseung Kwan O, as shown in the diagram here, metro stations are the urban nooks and the focal points of the neighborhood, with the concentration of the highest development density. And we built community facilities like schools, medical and health center, etc., within walking distance around the nodes. You may be aware that in other international cities, there are recent movements suggesting looks like similar style of integrated neighborhood development that we provide all sorts of facilities within walking distance to people. Like in Copenhagen, they talk about 5 minutes neighborhood. In Paris, 15-minute city. In Melbourne, 20 minutes neighborhood. It looks like this type of planning concept for integrated neighborhoods is increasingly accepted in the Western countries and Western cities. In Hong Kong, metro development has to integrate with urban development. And in Hong Kong, our model to build metro, we call it the R plus P, rail plus property model. This model allows our metro company to leverage on the real estate values to finance both the construction of the metro lines and sustain the fare revenue without government transport subsidies. This is an amazing achievement, and you are interested to know how we can do it, you may refer to these two studies done by me. Investment in metro line can also lead to urban spatial changes, like decentralizing offices and housing. This is something that I've done to try to explore these changes in my research. Now, our buildings in the city center are indeed very dense together. And because of these, new urban development projects can generate positive spillover effects on an existing neighborhood. However, the effects are not automatic, especially positive effects. My research has found that the positive effects do not depend on proximity alone, that is, how close you are together, but indeed on spatial connectivities, urban design, and good interfacing between the new development and the neighborhood. And that means you need good urban planning and design. Not only good urban planning design matters. In another study to explore here, office development on previously industrial brownfield sites. The scale of redevelopment also does have an effect. You need to reach a certain threshold, in this example, certain threshold level of office redevelopment before the residential neighborhood will experience positive changes. These threshold effects indeed are found also in other studies as well. So I talked so much about the positive contribution of planning and all the good things about compact city development. Do we have big challenges and problems? The answer is yes. Aging population is one of big challenges in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is becoming an aging society. In the next 40 more years, our population of over 65 will rapidly grow to 36%. So our urban planners need to create an age-friendly urban environment. One issue to address is to produce age-friendly walkability and accessibility to facilities in our multi-level cities. Another big challenge that we are facing is urban decay. Many of our buildings in the old urban districts are getting dilapidated due to lack of maintenance. And our pace of redevelopment simply cannot catch up with the rate of decay. When the two aging problems come together, we have the problem of what we call, quote unquote, double aging. That is, the elderly people with limitation in mobility living in aging buildings without elevators. And these issues are particularly severe, as you can see from this diagram, in the urban center, and have to be addressed by our future strategic plan. Housing affordability is still also a major problem to many people, especially the younger generation. No matter what statistics you are using, Hong Kong housing cost is undeniably very high in global standards. So congestions, especially living condition of our lower income families, are very poor if they do not have public subsidies. To economize on the housing cost, many of the families are living in very tight units, what we call subdivided flats, meaning they try to turn the larger apartments into self-contained smaller units. The environment, of course, is not very good, and the units are very small as 5 square meters or less. On the other hand, in new housing development, some what we call nano flats are being built, meaning that they are very tiny self-contained apartments, for example, maybe 20 square meters each for a household, because the family cannot afford the lump sum cost of a bigger apartment. We therefore have to find more land to build housing, more housing units and better housing, especially public and affordable housing apartments and high-rise development with essential facilities and services. We also have to build transitional housing as temporary accommodation for those badly in need. Hong Kong is trying to make the best use of our latest building technology, for example, modular integrated construction or other techniques, to try to speed up the pace of housing production, to reduce construction waste, and also try to enhance construction safety. This is not easy to do in a compact urban environment of Hong Kong, even though all these building modules can be physically manufactured elsewhere. The transportation of these modules to Hong Kong along our very narrow streets, of course, is a major challenge. Another issue that we have to face when we try to increase urban density is environmental threats. Heat island effects, poor air ventilation, okay, higher urban temperature, and so on are some major problems in the old urban districts. So urban planners have to find ways to tackle these problems. We can make use of urban or eco-friendly building design to address these problems. Air ventilation assessment needs to be carried out in order to examine different scenarios of building height, massing, blocks, and so on, in order to identify the best solution. So before closing, I would like to repeat 3 points that I made in my online conversation with Senator Chang previously, which I think are also relevant. As you can see from my examples, with good urban planning and design, high-density development can enhance the livabilities of our environment and human settlement. Or whether high-density development is suitable to a place or replicable depends very much on the local context. Okay, for example, culture, aspiration, and local constraint, and so on. Last but not least, in my view, the success of high-density development ultimately rests upon good citizenship, because compact development requires a lot of tolerance among people, requires sharing, requires interaction, requires a lot of cares of each other, mutual adjustment, and so on. These characteristics are also very important qualities of what defines a successful city. This is the end of the presentation. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. We appreciate your very insightful presentation. And Evan, are there questions for the professor?
Yes, there are. Thanks so much, Lynn. The first question we want to ask is that Hong Kong is one of the most unequal cities in the world in terms of economics, which is partially exacerbated by the housing shortage. Do you believe that land use can play a role in addressing this inequality?
Thank you for the question, Evan. Yes, indeed. Housing cost is so high. That's why because this housing burden is a big burden to many people, especially the younger generation, and that's why to address this, public housing is one of the means to try to address this inequality. Indeed, in Hong Kong, as you can see from the statistics, we are providing in fact, half of the population indeed are living in some kind of a public housing or subsidized housing by the government. So to some extent, this is a way to try to address the inequality, if you like, the issue of inequality here. So indeed, housing is a means, especially public housing, the means of public welfare support, especially to the less well-off people in Hong Kong.
Okay, I know we don't have too much time left. So someone is wondering, how are projects designed so that green spaces between towers are substantially used?
Thank you very much. This is a very important question. Okay, indeed, that you can see from my example, you have to talk about really good design. Okay, and if we are able to have high-rise development, we can in fact leave a lot of good a lot of areas on the ground level for open spaces, but just leaving them open is not very attractive. You have to have, for example, landscaping. Okay, you have to have connectivities. Okay, you have to make sure that it's safe to use. Security is also very important. So I think these are all about urban design. Okay, that our urban designer and architects are very good at doing. But indeed, unless you are able to provide these ground level spaces, okay, you are not able to, through compact development, through high-rise development, you're not able to afford to have too much ground level spaces or open spaces on the ground to attract people to use.
Thank you. I think we might have time for one more question. So Carla Mays is wondering, since Hong Kong is in the ring of fire and has weather challenges like cyclones and issues of climate change in the next few decades, what are some of the processes that in construction and planning of these towers that try to mitigate the effects of these?
Yes, exactly right. I mentioned above one example, okay? Climate change, indeed, very important issues, where especially in a complex city like Hong Kong, high-density development, okay? I talk about how we when we are talking about new developments, especially in the urban district, we have to carry out air ventilation. So we have to studies. So we have to make sure that first of all, the high-rise development is going to improve local climate environment. We also have to tackle this issue not only from building massing, from the building height and block. This is one way. We have to talk about whether we are using greener building materials, and the new technology I talk about, MIC, is one way of reducing construction waste, and to some extent this is also helpful to compact climate changes as well.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And again, thank everyone for their great questions during the entire conference. It certainly wouldn't be as informative and as engaging without all of your participation. So we thank